Hi, I'm Colleen, and let's do a February wrap-up. So if you watched my February TBR, I said I was going to mood read this entire month, and I think I did a pretty good job at doing that. So because of that, I didn't read as much as I normally do. I read 5 full-length novels, 1 like 200-ish page novella, which I don't know if that's necessarily considered a novella or a novel. I never know if like the 200-page mark. And then I read 2 short novellas that were just under 100 pages. So not as much as I usually read, but it was kind of nice to just sort of read what I felt like instead of trying to barrel through a bunch of books. I did not read like 15 romance novels, which I said I might do, but I did read 4 romance novels. The first being When a Scot Ties the Knot by Tessa Dare. Now, I've talked before on my channel about how much I love Tessa Dare. I think that if you like historicals, but you also like romances that are a little bit funny, she's like the perfect marriage of those two ideas. This is the third in the Castles Ever After series, which I have thoroughly enjoyed. And in this one, we have kind of a spin on a common trope. So several romance novels include the trope of like fake dating or marriage of convenience. And in this one, our heroine Madeline, who's also like really cool because she's a naturalist illustrator, decides that because she doesn't really want to like go to balls and like do the courting scene, she's going to just invent a fiance. And she's going to put him far away in war, and she's going to write to him. And she does this for like a decade. And then she kills him off and gets to mourn and be over him. What she doesn't know is that Captain Mackenzie, who she's writing to, is actually a real person, and she's receiving his letter, or he is receiving the letters that she is writing him, and then he shows up, like, let's get married, because he does have some motives as to why he would want to marry her. This is so much fun. I read it so fast. Tessa Dare is just really wonderful. She's such a comfort read for me because there's never too much angst in her stories. Obviously, they're romance novels, so they always end happily, and they always just put a smile on my face. So 5 stars for When a Scot Ties the Knot. Next, I did end up finishing the Highland Magic series by Kerrigan Byrne. So I had 2 books left in that series to finish. It's a collection of 9. And the first one I read, which was number 8, is Highland Witch. Now, in this one, we have a druid priestess named Kenna, who we did meet in the last one. And she, along with her 2 cousins, are fighting the witches from Macbeth from bringing about the apocalypse. So this last trilogy, because it's really written like 3 separate trilogies, had a very different feel than the first 2 trilogies to me. Because this is way more like high magic, world's gonna end type of magic. So Kenna meets a berserker, Niall, or I don't know how you say that, Niall, who is, it's very obvious right away that they're soulmates. She's kind of using him because when she sleeps with him, she like gets his power, and it like gives her a jolt of power, which is helpful. But this wasn't my favorite in the series. I have to say, neither was the other one. I definitely liked the earlier books better, but it was still really fun, and I still enjoyed myself while I was reading it. So the next one in that series is called Highland Warrior, and that is about Malcolm, who is the only male moray of the druid priests and priestesses we've been meeting. And he is both an earth druid and like the King of Scotland. This story was interesting because his like soulmate is Vian, I think is how you say her name. V-I with an accent A-N, so I think it's Vian. And she is kind of like a soul trapped in hell by the bad witches. And they send her to seduce him and ultimately bring about his death. I really liked the idea of this story, but I think it needed to be a novel because everything happened so fast for this. Because you got to think they're like enemies. So this is really like an enemies, like deadly enemies to lovers story. And 80 pages didn't feel long enough to sort of get behind their relationship and how they felt about each other. But it's still very good. I gave both of these, I think, 4 stars, which for me, 4 is like a solid star. Like, I liked it. I would recommend it. I was never bored, and it wasn't something I like put down for a while. Right, next, I have a book that wasn't on my February TBR because it was an ARC and I didn't know I was going to get it. And I was so excited. And it is I'll Come Back For You by Cherish Reed. So I've talked about Cherish Reed before. Her book, Trust Falling For You, was in my best of 2021 wrap up. And this is slightly a departure of what she normally writes. So the other books I've read by her are The Right Escape and Hearts on Hold, and then Trust Falling For You. And those are all contemporary romances. This one's a paranormal romance, and I would say that even like borderline on horror, which if you know me, you know that is very scary for me. But I love Cherish Reed so much, so I obviously wanted to read this book. First of all, can I tell you how much I love this cover? I'm definitely team like photography on romance novel covers rather than illustrations. That's just like who I am. So I super love this cover, and it's got like just enough of a creepy factor to let you know the book will be a little bit scary. So in this book, we meet Whitney and her sister Helen, and they are running a bed and breakfast that they sort of inherited from their grandmother in upstate New York. They are not from New York, they're from Florida. And we start with a unbelievably well-written prologue showing something bad that had happened to Whitney in the past. I forgot to say at the beginning of this has a content warning for PTSD following a natural disaster. If that's something you avoid, that is in here. So their B&B is haunted, and the spirit is becoming more malicious and like messing with guests' things, and like a pair of diamond earrings gets stolen. So Whitney's sister Helen contacts this TV show called Ghost Hunters, and they agree to come. Now Whitney's high school crush is the cameraman on the show, so it's like, oh my god, they're forced proximity. There's a ghost. They get stuck in the B&B during a snowstorm, and they really get to like rekindle their relationship. Now in high school, they had kind of had like crushes on each other, but they had run into each other, I think it was like 5 years ago, and like almost hooked up, but then it didn't happen. Cherish Reed writes such great banter, and not only between her hero and heroine, but also between the sisters. So like I loved reading the scenes where the sisters were talking to each other because it felt so real, like how you talk to your sister and you kind of like mess with each other, but obviously you like really love each other and will do anything to keep each other safe. 5 stars, definitely. Little scary for me. Did have to sleep with my closet light on that night. And that was a great book to transition us into our next genre, which is thrillers and mysteries. So the first one I read was The Other Mother by Carol Goodman. Huge content warning on this book. And it actually starts with one, which I really appreciated. And the warning is that you should not read this book if you have postpartum OCD, postpartum psychosis, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. It's got a nice little paragraph at the beginning. And I heartily agree with that. I would even go so far as to say you probably shouldn't read this book within a year of having a baby, maybe more, and probably within 6 months before having a baby. That's harder to control. So The Other Mother starts great, like a true Carol Goodman mystery, with Daphne running from something, and you're not really sure what she's running from, but she has her daughter Chloe with her, and she shows up at her new place of employment, which is like this old house in the middle of the woods near a mental institution, of course, and she's starting a new job there, helping a writer kind of like organize all of her stuff to like maybe write a book or just like going through everything. We then jump back and forth between this line, which is the present, and then we read Daphne's journals over the past few months, as well as her friend Laurel's journals. Laurel and Daphne had met in a group for young mothers experiencing postpartum depression, and they both have a daughter named Chloe. And we kind of watch how they sort of imprint on each other. Now, a big part of this book is you aren't sure of the identity of several of the characters. So again, if you were dealing with like intense postpartum or even just intense anxiety at this point, I don't know if this is the best book for you to read. It's really interesting, and I really like how it got tied together at the end. The mental institution obviously comes into play. There's a lot of Daphne wondering whether or not the reality she's experiencing is real, which was a cool read. This is not my favorite Carol Goodman. I did a video about all my favorite Carol Goodmans because I've read all of them. a couple weeks ago, and I would put this probably in the bottom half. I still really liked it, but it didn't like have that, I didn't have that same visceral reaction I did to some of the other ones, like The Sea of Lost Girls. Next, my book of the month pick for February was The Golden Couple by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. Now, this is a cool book. It has two narrators. One is a therapist who's sort of like a unconventional therapist, and she doesn't actually have a license anymore. And her name is Avery. And she has two new clients who are a married couple named Marissa and Matthew Bishop. And they come into Avery's office, and Marissa has set up this appointment so she can confess infidelity to Matthew. Now, the moment she does that, the three of them go on this like crazy journey together. And there's so many weird things that happen, and it all gets tied up. Now, this was a really fun domestic thriller. I don't know how long it will actually stick with me. It was one of those books that was hard to put down. I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun reading it, but I don't know if in like 6 months I'll still be thinking about this book. So I gave it 4 stars. Still a great read, but I don't know if it's going to be one of those that like holds my brain forever. Next up, I read one classic in February, and it was The Quiet American by Graham Greene. I was very excited to read this because The End of the Affair by Graham Greene is one of my favorite classics. So this was an interesting read because it's very short. It's like, I think 200 pages, not even 180 pages, but it wasn't a fast read. It was actually a really slow read. And I found myself just reading probably like 15 to 20 pages at a time until I got to the last like 60. And then I think I sat and read it straight through. But I read it over a long period of time and read other books at the same time. That isn't to say I found the book boring. I just found that while I was reading it, I was enjoying it, and the writing was very beautiful, but it wasn't something that I felt like I had to keep turning the pages to find out. This was an extremely timely read because the premise of this book is that we're following Fowler, who is a British journalist living in Vietnam in the 1950s, like the early 1950s, during the early stages of American involvement in the Vietnam War. So we've got the French colonialists, the actual Vietnam people, and the Viet Minh, I think is how you say it. And then also the Americans are now getting involved. I have to be honest, the Vietnam War is a part of history that I really don't know anything about. I didn't take any classes about it, and I feel like I really don't know much at all. The Quiet American is Pyle, and he is a man that Fowler, our British journalist, meets. And he's portrayed as a very like wide-eyed innocent that doesn't really understand war. Fowler's big through theme in this is that he can't take sides because he is a journalist and he needs to just report what's happening. Whereas Pyle has this sort of colonialism / like American superpower point of view that like America's going to make everything better, which if we know, I know that that's not what happened in Vietnam. Two of them also have this sort of point of contention in that Fowler has a mistress, Fong, who he is very fond of, but he's married and his wife won't give him a divorce, and Pyle comes in and he wants her basically, and because he can marry her. It's a very weird setup, and you never really get Fong's point of view, like who she loves, who she cares about. Does she care about either of them? But you do get the feeling that she would marry Pyle to get to go to America. And if she could, she would marry Fowler to get to go to the UK. Just that she's sort of stuck in this country that's undergoing such a horrible war, and she'll do anything to get out of there. What this book really solidified for me is Graham Greene writes people grieving love very well, whether it be the death of someone they love or just the loss of someone they loved. That's really where he shines in this story. Overall, I did really enjoy reading The Quiet American, but I didn't love it like I loved The End of the Affair. 4 stars. Lastly, I have a book that I'm not really sure how to describe the genre. It's literary fiction or maybe historical fiction, or some people might call it even like historical fantasy. I don't even know what book of the month billed it as, but it was The Book of Longings by Sumunk Kidd. And this was my best book of the month. So this is a medium-paced book, and this is the story of the wife of Jesus. So if that is something that you don't want to read, then you shouldn't read it. But I really like alternate retellings of religious figures. That is just who I am as a person. So we follow Anna. And she is a young Jewish woman living around the turn of that millennium. And we follow her whole life. We follow her as soon as she's a young teen and her parents are looking for someone to marry her. We follow her relationship with Jesus, and we follow her relationship with several other women. Her aunt, her best friend. We meet Mary, Jesus' mother. We also meet some of the women that are in the Bible, like Mary Magdalene and Lazarus' sisters, whose names I can't remember now. We meet some of the disciples. Anna's brother, they're not actually brothers, I think they're actually a cousin and a sister, but they've been raised as siblings, is Judas. This book was a wonderful read. Sue Monk Kidd is a beautiful writer. The prose in here is fantastic. I'll be honest, after I finished this book, I cried for about 30 minutes because it is extremely powerful. And if you are a Christian, you know how it ends. Even if you're not, you probably know how it ends. So it's lovely. It's definitely not for everybody. And it has no aspect of like the divinity of Jesus. It's only about the humanity of Jesus, if that's helpful to you. I really loved this book, and I've actually never read anything else by Sue Monk Kidd. Secret Life of Bees came out when I was working at the indie bookstore, and I was super into fantasy at that point, so I never read it, but this honestly makes me want to read more of her books because it was so good. So that is my February wrap-up. As I said at the beginning, not as prolific as some of my other months, but still fun. I had some really good reads. I'm looking forward to my March reading now. I hope you had a wonderful February worth of books, and I hope you found something in this video today that you might enjoy. I hope you are in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. See you soon.